Good morning. This morning we're going to pick up where we left off last week. We have 4 legs, 2 front legs and 2 back legs, and we're going to add the sides and back. The sides and back consist of top and bottom railings and about 4 slats that are tongue and groove, and their edges are beveled to provide some shadow lines. There will be 3 lower rails, 1 on each side and 1 in the back. And the lower rails will look just like the front rail. And so while we're at it, we might just do all 4 all at the same time. So let's take a look at our 2D drawing of the front. And we'll zoom in here and notice a few things. One, the rail itself is 3 inches wide. And if I come to this point right here, it's the distance from that point to the top edge is 3.5. That means the rail is set up from the curve in the leg by 1/2 inch. So let's start with that. Also, the rail is going to sit back in from the front edge of the leg so that it doesn't cover this shape right here. So what we'll do, first of all, is we'll create a line 1/2 inch back from the front edge of the leg, and a line 1/2 inch up, and what I'm going to do is take a line parallel to the red axis going through that point right there. Now I'll make another parallel construction line up along the blue axis, and I may have to use the up arrow key. And I'll make that 3 inches. So now if I use, well, let me rotate around here. I'm going to use the rectangle tool. And where that point enters the leg, at that intersection right there, I'm going to draw a rectangle. It goes to that intersection point. All right, now that represents the front face of the rail. What we need is the curve in the bottom before we push-pull this. So let's go back and look at the dimensions here. The curve starts 1 inch out from either side. And it extends up 1 inch from the bottom. So let's put that in here. One inch from that side. One inch from this side. And 1 inch from the bottom. And now we can use the arc tool. We'll start at this point down here, then this point, and then the midpoint. Notice that the VCB says 1 inch bulge. So we'll mark that, take the eraser, erase that. And now the rails are 1 inch thick. You can take my word for that, or if you want to look at the drawing of the dressers, you'll see that I'm going with the same dimensions for the rails that the dresser was made with. So I'm going to push-pull this back 1 inch. And there we go. We now have a bottom rail. So I'm going to immediately make it a component. Call it bottom rail. I can still edit it, which I will do because I have to put in the top, I have to put a dado to accept the slats that will be vertical and sit into the dado. Now to add the dado is going to be 1/4 of an inch thick and 1/2 inch deep. So this is 1 inch wide. If I take 1/4 of an inch from 1 inch, that's 3/4 of an inch, or I have to bring it in 3/8 of an inch from each side. So I'll do that now. Now I'll go into edit component mode. I can barely see that line, but we'll let's see. There we go. That's a better view. I'll start here at that intersection. Down to here. And now I'll use the push-pull tool. Bring that down 1/2 inch. Okay, we'll leave it at that for now. I'll worry about the joinery later. Let me just get the all the rails in here. So that's the front rail. I can get rid of let me see. I'll get rid of some of these construction lines. The others might be useful. Okay. I'm going to pick up this component with the Move Copy tool. Then I'm going to move it back here, right at that point. But now I got to move it in 1/2 inch. So I'll just move it back along the blue axis, or green axis this time, 1/2 inch. And now that one's in place. I need to copy it. I'll move it out along the green axis. And I'm going to use the rotate tool. Rotate it 90 degrees. And we'll move it into place. I'm going to start by moving it right. Well, let me see. I got to get up here. Right there, I think. Let me just make sure that's really. Yep. And now I want to move it back 1/2 inch and up 1/2 inch. So I'll start back first, along the red. And I want to move it up a ½ inch along the blue. Now that one's in place. Now I'll do the same thing. I'll copy it over to this side. Move it back 1/2. Move it up along the blue axis. I'm going to use my up arrow key here. There we go. 1/2 inch. Now that one's in place. All right. That takes care of the bottom rail. Let's look at what we have here. Now the top rails are going to be a little different. There's not going to be a defined large top rail for the front. However, the sides are going to look very much like the top rails on the dresser. So we'll take a look at that. The top rails on the dresser have no curve. They're just 3 inches thick and 3 inches wide and 1 inch thick, and extend between the legs, with a dado on the bottom this time. So let's do that. I'll start this time with the rectangle tool. I'll start here. And I'm going to go out to this edge, and I'll look in the VCB, and I'll notice two numbers. One says approximately 6 1/8, comma 14. The 14 is actually the correct dimension. It's the length of this rectangle. The 6 1/8 should really be 3 inches. So I'm going to type 3 comma. That's all I need to type, and it gives me the correct dimension for the rectangle I want. Just to be sure, it's 3 inches. And now we'll give it its thickness of 1 inch. And at this point, we might as well go on to the bottom and put the dado in. Start with this edge and move over 3/8, and then move this edge .3/8, and we can now begin to draw our dado in. I gotta turn that a little more. There we go. I'll turn this back. And we'll push that up a ½ inch. Okay, so there's our dado. We can now make this a top rail. And it has to line up with the bottom rail. And we'll notice that the bottom rail set in 1/2 inch from the back edge. And that's also true here. 1/2 inch. So we'll do the same to this. Go out 1/2 inch. And I'm going to copy this. Move it over 1/2 inch. And I'm going to copy it one more time. Rotate it 90 degrees. Now move it into place. Move it back 1/2 inch. There we go. Now we have all the rails in place. Let's just inspect things here a little bit. All right, so now we're ready to put our slats in place. I'm going to shoot for about 4 slats on each side. So I have to do a little calculation. I'll go offline here for the moment and see what that looks like. Okay, I went offline and I did some calculations. The most important thing I need to worry about here is the expansion of these slats, seasonal expansion. And I used my calculator, this little calculator right here, called Wood Expansion Calculator, and calculated that a nominal 3.5 inch cherry slat will expand about 3/64 of an inch or change totally, seasonally, about 3/64 of an inch, which is approximately 1/16. Now, where did I get the 3.5? Well, it's 14 inches. Let's just look here. From here to here is 14 inches, and I want to put 4 slats in there. So they'll be nominally 3.5 inches each. If I want to put a 1/16 inch gap between the slats, and I want the gaps to be equal on all sides of the slats, that will mean that there's going to be 5 gaps, each 1/16 of an inch. So if I subtract 5/16 of an inch from 14 and divide it by 4, I will get a slat that's nominally 3 27/64 of an inch wide. So let's start with that. 3 27/64 of an inch wide. Now let's find out how long they have to be. Okay, 19 3/4 by 3 27/64. So again, I'm going to go off to the side here. And I'm just going to type in 3 27/64, comma, 19 3/4. And I've got the dimensions in the wrong order, so I'll just type 19 3/4, comma, 3 27/64. There we go. And I'm going to make these 3/4 of an inch thick. I'm going to bring it out here a ways so I can work on it. All right, now I want these beveled a little bit on the edge so that they will look nice. But that's something I can do in a moment. Let's put the tongue in grooves on it. Recall that the top and bottom rails have grooves in them, dados, to receive some tongues. And we're going to make those tongues a 1/2 inch high. So we'll come out here like this, come over 3/8 of an inch, another 3/8 here, whoops, sorry. I'm having a really bad morning here. I don't want that 3/8 of an inch, I want it a 1/4 inch. And a 1/4 inch here. And now I can create my tongue and bring it up. I have to do the same thing on the other end. So I think what I'll do is just create some more construction lines here. 0 offset from this line. And I can come down here. Look at the bottom. Extend these along the green to that edge. There we that shouldn't have said midpoint. I'm not sure. Just want to make sure I got this right. 1/4, 1/2, 3/4. Okay, we got it right. And we'll extend this down a 1/2 inch. Now, I'm also going to have these slats are going to be tongue and grooved together. So one side of them has to have a tongue, also a 1/4 of an inch thick, but this time they're going to be, instead of a 1/2 inch, I'm going to make them 3/8 of an inch. So let me do that. Come out 3/8 of an inch. And we get some erasing to do here. On both sides. And for a moment, I'm going to ask you to trust me that I know what I'm doing. And what I'm going to do is there's going to have to be 2 types of slats. One with a tongue on both sides and one with a tongue on one side and a groove on the other. So I'm going to copy this. And move it over for the moment. I'll move it along the green axis. And I'll call this one I'll make it a component, call it wide slat. This one I'll call narrow slat. And you'll understand why in a moment. I'm going to edit this one. I might be able to save myself some erasure if I do this. Ran into a little problem there. Nope, I still have an erasure. But I'm going to bring this out 3/8 of an inch. Do all my erasing. And now I'm going to, in this one, I'm going to edit it. I'm going to put a groove instead of a tongue. And the groove is going to be 3/8 of an inch. By the way, might as well correct the surface here. Might be a little nitpicky, but if you're going to texture these, then you're going to want to do this. Okay, now I've got my two types of slats. And I'm going to put them in place. Actually, what I might do, first of all, let me get rid of a whole bunch of construction lines. Recall that I wanted a 1/16 inch groove between these, so I'll copy this. Let me move this one out a 1/16 of an inch. That gives me a slight gap there of a 1/16 of an inch to allow for expansion. I'll copy this one. Then move it back out along the green 1/16 of an inch. And lastly, I'll put this one in place. And I'm going to copy out. I'm sorry, just move out 1/16 of an inch for my last gap. Now I've got the side. And one of the very few times that I will use a group is right now. I'll make this a group. I don't care what the name is. But now I can move it as a group. By the way, let's just take a measurement here. See what we have. From here to here, it's 13 7/8, 1/8 inch short of 14, or 1/16 allowed on both sides for a space. So here's what we will do. I'm going to put this in place. But before I do, I'm going to copy it twice. Now I'll put, well, let me start with this one. I'll put it in place. All right, I'm going to put it in place by putting it right, if I can get there, right there. I'm going to want to move that a 1/16 of an inch this way along the green. And I'm going to want to move it back 3/8 of an inch. That should center it in my rails. And it looks like I got it right. All right, so while we're at it, we'll put the other one in place. I've got to move it a 1/16 of an inch this way. Three-eighths of an inch that way. I'll put my last one in place. But before I do, I have to rotate it 90 degrees. Use the shift key to keep my orientation for the cursor. Sometimes these are difficult to get in the right spot. All right, I'm going to move it. One 1/16 of an inch. I'm sorry. 3/8. And 1/16. Now I think I noticed something that didn't look right. That doesn't look right. One of these are off. They're all off. So my calculation was wrong. And my calculation was wrong. I moved them 3/8 of an inch. The rail is 1 inch wide, and the slats are 3/4. 3/4 minus 1 minus 3/4 is a quarter, divided by 2 is 1/8. So I should have moved them 1/8. So what I can do now is just move them all out 2/8. There you go. That's better. All right, now this has been a pretty long video to this point. So instead of worrying about the joinery this week, I think what we'll do is we'll call it quits. And next week I'll come back and we'll catch up with the joinery for all of this. And probably put the top and bottom rails here and get ready for the draws. So let's call it quits and catch up next week. Okay, thank you.